Don't forget, guys, giving away a Nintendo Switch and a game on the channel this month. All you need to do is like, subscribe, and hit the bell. And every time a notification for my video goes live, leave a comment because that guarantees you an entry into the competition. And if you like PS4s, Claytano is giving away a PS4 on his channel if you head over there, youtube.com/Claytano. Hey guys, so a lot of people are asking me for an item guide for autochess mobile. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the items in the classes, so like defensive, offensive, skill-based, mana generation. And then I'm going to go through some of the more unique items, so the higher tier items, what combinations you should be looking out for. And I'm also going to talk about what does stack and what doesn't stack. Now this is one of the biggest questions that I get asked. What stacks and what doesn't stack? This is something that's happened in autochess mobile a lot. I wish they'd make it so that everything stacks, so that we would never have this problem. But from what I know, Shield does not stack, so this doesn't stack here. Dracula Mask does not stack, but weirdly enough, Frantic Mask does. But yes, so Shield and Dracula Mask do not stack. They are really the only two things that you need to be concerned about in terms of stacking. It's very unlikely that you're going to find yourself with 2 Acts of Devil Bloods, or 2 Maelstroms, or 2 Acts of Furies, or even 2 Orb of Refreshes on a single unit, of course. In general, the rule of thumb is that the unique items do not stack. So these legendary items here, the rule of thumb is that in general they do not stack. If they have a unique effect, like Barbaric Cuirass, they don't stack in most cases. But to be completely fair to you, the only things that you're really ever going to have to worry about is Shield and Dracula Mask. In general, as far as we're aware, they don't stack. I'm not 100% certain on Dracula Mask, it's very difficult to tell. They did stack in Dota Autochess as far as I'm aware, and it feels like they should stack. But to be honest with you, I never usually put more than 1 Dracula Mask on a unit anyway, because usually, if they're going onto an offensive unit, which they usually do, I either keep them to combine with a wooden club, so they can make Frantic Mask, or I spread them out across my carries, just to have some lifesteal across the board. But yeah, so in general, when you're concerned with early game items, everything stacks, apart from Shield and potentially Dracula Mask. But never stack 2 shields onto 1 unit, that definitely doesn't stack. Everything else does though, including the mana generation items. Some people that thought that Magic Crystal doesn't stack, but it does. Magic Crystal definitely stacks. Everything else stacks as well. So let's talk about defensive items. And when I'm talking about defensive items, I'm going to talk about the basic defensive items. Shield, Cattlehide Armor, Resistance Cloak, Kira Axe, Live Crystal, and Steel Plate Mail. As well as Dragon Blood Axe as well, but that's more of a higher tier defensive item. The general rule of thumb when it comes to items is if you have a unit that you know that you're going to sell, so for me, that is always things like goblins in the early game, or I have some warriors that I know are not going to be included in my late game comp. Give them your items so that you can sell them later and figure out what you want to do with it. Another rule of thumb is I generally don't combine items until the late game. When I've got all of my items together, I like to keep them as individuals on units that I know I'm going to sell, unless I have something like a Frantic Mask, which I know is a good combination, and I can put on something like a Lightblade Knight or an Agursis Ranger or a Berserker. I generally don't combine items until the late game. So, any of your items that you pick up, usually a good early game tactic is put them on someone that you know you're going to sell. Don't combine them, and then get them back in the late game when you're sort of, past round 25 maybe? So after round 20 or 25, and you've sold your units, you have all of your items in your inventory, then think about how you want to combine them to make the best items for your team. It's a good rule of thumb, it's a good way to play the game, it's a good thing to stick to. When it comes to defensive items, they generally just go on your front line. I like to stack all of my defensive items onto 1 important unit. In Feathered or in Assassins, that is Warpwood Sage most of the time. He is a big beefy unit. He makes the best use out of the resistances. His ultimate heals everybody, so the more of those that you can get off in a round, the more likely you are to succeed. So in any Feathered or Assassin builds, I put all of my defensive items onto Warpwood Sage. In Warrior builds, it either goes onto Doom, Pirate Captain, or if I don't have any of those, Swordman. Swordman is a really, really good unit right now who benefits from having the armor or the magic resist. In Hunters, it goes on to anything that is my frontline. If that is God of War, all of it goes onto God of War. Sometimes it goes on to either Red Axe or onto Skull Hunter. Generally Skull Hunter, because he benefits from the damage increase from Hunters. Mages, Pirate Captain. Gods, God of War. Think about it like this. It generally goes on your tank. You want it to go on the tank that you want to live the longest because they have the most impact. So you need to think about it in the way that resistances increase the effective health pool of whichever tank that you're giving those resistances to. So that would be things like Warpwood Sage, that would be things like Pirate Captain, because they're important units for your composition. So think about any of these items going on to a big defensive unit in the front line. Do not give them to your back line. Don't think that giving your Lightblade Knight or your Dwarf Sniper or your Regursus Ranger armor is good, because for 90% of the battle they're not going to take any damage, so there's no point. You might as well put them on the back line and give this to your front line so that your front line survives longer because they have more health, and then you can do more damage with your back line. Let's talk about the mana generation items now, and I'll talk about Ring of Life in a second. So when I'm talking about mana generation items, I'm talking about Magic Crystal, I'm talking about Mysterio Staff. There are only 2 basic mana generation items. These generally go on a unit that you want to cast their ultimate as quickly as possible into the battle. So things like Siren, things like Storm Shaman, sometimes things like Razor Claw, although to be honest Razor Claw is tanky enough that he doesn't need it. These can go on assassins like Phantom Queen, these can go on assassins like Lord of Sand, this can go on Abyssal Crawler. I generally put it on Shining Assassin though, because you want her to generate her ultimate quickly to keep her as invulnerable as long as possible, especially at level 2. She can basically generate infinite shields if you have enough magic crystals on her. So these go on units that you want to generate their ultimate quickly. Now you need to think in your head, because it is pretty easy to find yourself getting an Orb of Refresh these days. When you put Magic Crystals onto a unit, think which of them would benefit from an Orb of Refresh. Siren, Storm Shaman, God of Thunder in the late game. You can put it onto Razor Claw to get 2 bears out. But in general, I save my Orb of Refresh for things like Siren, and I save it for Pirate Captain, I save it for Storm Shaman, and then Razor Claw if I'm not running any of those. Those are like the main units that benefit from an Orb of Refresh. Siren is probably the best Orb of Refresh target in the game. Storm Shaman is also pretty good, especially if you're running gods or just mages in general. So those are the units that I would consider an Orb of Refresh for. So when you're giving Magic Crystal over to any kind of unit, make sure that you think about which units would benefit from Orb of Refresh. If you're giving it to a unit in the early game, make sure you're damn well going to sell it, because Magic Crystal... Why can't I say that word properly? Magica Crystal is one of the best items in the game. In fact, I would wager that Magica Crystal... My accent is awful. Is probably the most important item that you can have in any game, because abilities are so important. So getting the utility of extra mana generation to get your ability off quicker is way more important than anything else, I think. Magicka Staff is a damage increase item. This goes on units that have high damage, high impact abilities. Generally, I give this to things like Thunder Spirit. I give it to things like Tortola Elder, Wind Ranger, Devastator, Pirate Captain, or Swordman in warrior builds. But just look at the damage that your ability deals and think 10% increase. So giving it to someone like a Skybreaker or a Ripper or anything that doesn't deal damage, like Siren, Werewolf, that's all useless. Don't ever give them this item. This goes on your big impact ability carries. So make sure you give it to a unit that has a big damage ability. Or deals a lot of damage over time, like Swordman. And then Mysterio Staff increases skill damage by 15%, but also increases mana generation when dealing damage. This is great for Pirate Captain, because it can build into Scythe of Vice, which increases skill damage and mana generation, and also you get that unique passive where you get the Hex. This is also great for things like backline carries like Tortola Elder. It's great for things like God of Thunder. It's great for things like Wind Ranger. It's great for things like Thunder Spirit. Again, just look at a unit that you want to generate their ultimate quickly, Storm Shaman as well, this is great for Storm Shaman, and think I would also benefit from attack damage increase, or sorry, ability damage increase. Not good for Siren. This is not a great item for Siren, simply because she doesn't make use out of the 15% skill damage increase. Great if you don't have any other mana generation items on her, and if I didn't get any magic crystals the entire game, I would consider putting Mysterio Staff onto Siren just to be able to generate her ultimate more quickly. But overall, this should go on units that have big impact abilities that you want to increase the damage of. So now when it comes to Ring of Life, you have two options. You can either cash in early game to make Anti-Major Cloak for an extra 15% magic resist, or you can save it in the hopes that you'll get an Orb of Refresh. In general, I save it. Unless I don't have a target that's going to benefit from an Orb of Refresh, I save it most of the time. I would always recommend saving this until the late game anyway. 15% magic resist is not going to make a big deal to you, or not going to make a big difference to you, until you get to the late game and you're running like warriors, or you need that extra magic resist on a certain unit. But generally save your Ring of Lives, because they are so important for potentially getting a Orb of Refresh, which can actually win you games by itself. I would never combine it into an anti-magic cloak unless I was pretty confident that I don't need an Orb of Refresh this game. So that's a bit of advice when it comes to Ring of Life. And again, that goes back to just having those items in your inventory, not combined until the late game. Teleport Dagger is a unique one. It does, like, basically the mana generation does stack, but the teleporting doesn't. This is a very, very difficult item to actually place onto a unit, because often that unit becomes a sacrificial lamb. You want to give it to a unit where they aren't that good outside of their ultimate cast. So I'm talking things like Dark Spirit, I'm talking things like Devastator, I'm talking things like maybe Storm Shaman, like if you can only get one Storm Shaman ultimate off in a fight. This is a very, very hard item to use properly. In general, if you are... This is my piece of advice about Teleport Dagger. If you're not confident about repositioning one of your units, and you're not confident about them surviving, don't. The best person to give this item to in general is usually Pirate Captain, especially if you've got defensive items on him, because he will survive and he'll be able to generate his ultimate more quickly. He'll also be right at the back line, and he'll turn attention to him. One of the other people that I give this to is Shining Assassin. Because she jumps to the backline anyway, it's free mana generation for her. So this is a good item for Shining Assassin in Assassin builds, because she goes to the backline anyway. So giving her Teleport Dagger is not going to change what she does, and also she gets free mana generation. So if you're worried about which person to give this item to, don't. But in Assassin comps, give it to Shining Assassin. Sometimes give it to Pirate Captain. You can give it to Dark Spirit. You can give it to Devastator. But if you're worried, don't, because it can screw you up really hard. When it comes to offensive items, and I'm talking things like these items here, these items here, this here, these should go on your backline carries that generally output the most DPS. In Knight builds, this is always Lightblade Knight. So when you're playing Dragon Knights, most of your flat attack damage goes onto Lightblade Knight. If you get this Wraith Shard, I give it to Dragon Knight, but I give Wooden Club most of the time to Lightblade Knight, because she's a really good target for Dracula Mask. If you're playing Glacial Knights, all onto Lightblade Knight, because a lot of people say, oh, it should go into Berserker, but realistically, the bounce damage that Lightblade Knight does far outweighs the damage output that Berserker has. I'm not saying that you can't spread your items across Lightblade Knight and Berserker. They are both good targets for a Frantic Mask, for instance, but most of the time, Lightblade Knight is going to out DPS Berserker because of the bounces that she has. She has a slightly lower attack speed, but she has much, much more damage across the enemy team. If you're going for single target damage, Berserker is better. If you're going for team-wide damage, which you should be most of the time, Lightblade Knight is best to stack all of these items onto. It's good for things like Exercis Ranger, it's good for things like Dwarf Sniper. I would stack most of my flat damage onto Dwarf Sniper because he survives the longest and also has the longest range and never needs to move, so his DPS is usually higher. Plus, with the change to Dwarfs, he now targets the lowest HP unit, so that's always good. But obviously things like Frantic Mask are better on Exercis Ranger, so you can sometimes give some of your attack damage items over to Exercis Ranger as well. You can spread them out between those two hunters. In Warriors, generally, it goes to Berserker, because you usually include Berserker in your Warrior comps. If it's not going onto Berserker, it's always usually going to go onto Abyssal Guard or Doom. I generally like to put defensive items onto Doom, because I like him to survive longer. But if you have free space, you can give him some offensive items too. So let's talk about some of the more, I guess, complex items here. Oblivion Staff, increased attack damage by 20 attack speed and a 50% chance that your attack cannot be dodged. This is like the anti-feathered item. So if you're going up against feathered, just give this to any unit that's got high attack speed and you want to try and deal a bit of extra damage. In Knights, again, that's Lightblade Knight. You can give it to Berserker. You can give it to any of your hunters, to be honest. I would recommend giving it to Dwarf Sniper. Crystal Sword is an interesting one. 15% chance to deal 1.5 times the damage while attacking. High attack speed units benefit from this really well. Berserker, Lightblade Knight, Agursis Ranger, Dwarf Sniper, anybody that, any of the other, basically any of the units that we've talked about benefit from this item. Claw Wand increases attack damage by 15, HP by 15%, and increases magic resist by 100% and immune to skills for the first 8 seconds with a cooldown of 30 seconds. This goes on a unit that you want to keep alive in the start of the fight. So, for instance, in Assassins, this always goes on your Shadow Crawler. Because her having the ability to be immune to abilities is just insane. In Hunters, this would sometimes go on one of your frontliners. So, in general, if you want to give this to someone who's likely to take damage at the start of the fight from an ability. So, for Warriors, I give this to Pirate Captain or to Berserker sometimes. In Hunters, I give this to a frontline. It's usually better on a frontliner because they're more likely to be affected by abilities than your backliners. The only backliners that I would consider giving this to would be things like Lightblade Knight, Dragon Knight, Dwarf Sniper, because having them be immune to CC and immune to abilities is important for their damage output. I would sometimes give this, for instance, to Dwarf Sniper, but in general, a 15% HP increase is better on a tank. So usually you give this to a frontliner. You can always, and then like I said, in Assassins, you can give it to Shadow Crawler. Any of these items, again, they're just all offensive items. They can go on the previous offensive item carries that we've talked about. Barbaric Cuirass grants 8 armor, 15% attack speed to allies in radius, and decreases enemy units armor by 8 and attack speed increase by 15%. This is good on any tank. It's not so good on God of War because it doesn't really benefit from the attack speed increase, but you can put it on God of War. I have put it on God of War before. But in general, you want to put this on a warrior in the front line. It can go on anybody, to be honest. And in warrior comps, I like to have Berserker sat right behind this unit to make sure they get the benefit of the attack speed increase straight away. Pulse Staff. This just goes on anybody that has a high damage ability and you want to generate their ability quickly. I like to give it to Storm Shaman. I like to give it to Pirate Captain sometimes. In Knights, I like to give it to Soul Reaper because it's really the only unit that benefits from it. So yeah, give it to anybody that you want to generate an ultimate quickly, and you can also have that sort of straight magic damage increase. Axe of Fury. This is an interesting one. Increases attack damage by 30 and increases mana generation by 100% upon dealing damage toward the enemy. Also deals pure damage equal to 30% of the attack damage to enemies within 2 grids from melee attacks. This does not go on ranged champions, also ranged units. Never put this on ranged units because they don't make any benefit from it. This is one of the best items in the game for Shadow Crawler. One of the best items in the game for Shadow Crawler, for sure. Absolutely insane for her. You might think, well, she doesn't benefit from the mana generation. The pure damage is too good to pass up. Never ever pass this up on Shadow Crawler. In terms of who else would benefit from this, it's usually for things like Abyssal Guard because they have a high base attack damage. This is great on Doom. This is insane on Doom. This is such a good Doom item. So Doom and Shadow Crawler make the best use of this because they just have such good attack damage. It's also pretty good on Hell Knight. I would also consider giving this to Hell Knight, for instance. This is a great Hell Knight unit item. Anybody that in general you're going to give defensive itemization to as well. This is just such an insanely good item for them, so I definitely always consider having this as an item for them. Orb of Refresh we've talked about. Won't talk about it again. Heart of Tarask. This is an insane God of War item. This is great for Warpwood Sage. This is basically good for any tank that you're stacking defensive itemization onto. This is such a good combo with armor and with magic resist. So make sure you just give it to the tank that has the most HP but also the most defensive items. This can go on any of your backline damage carries, both Mjolnir and Dragonbone Ballista, Lightblade Knight, Agursis Ranger, Dwarf Sniper, Berserker, any of those ranged attack damage carries that don't have really big impact abilities that take away from their ability to deal basic attacks. Talked about it before. We talked about Scythe of Vice before. Basically can go on anybody that has a skill that you want to increase the damage of. It's really good on Pirate Captain, for instance, but yeah, we talked about it before. And Killerbot 3000, I don't think I need to talk about too much. It's just flat damage increase. Great on Lightblade Knight, great on... Yeah, you heard me talk about it before. Yeah, so that's the full item guide, guys. I hope you learned a little bit more about items, and good luck in your games.